Mary, I want to talk to you mostly about Secretary Blinken going to China. But before we do that, do you have any assessment of what Hamas is doing here? I think they're just playing everybody.
Well, I think first of all, great always to be on with you, Hugh. I think you're seeing the playbook that Hamas has used in past conflicts, which is to take hostages, play the political game, extort Israel, try to turn public opinion against Jerusalem, and then use it to their advantage to draw out the conflict, to create division within Israeli society and within the allies of Israel, like the United States. And to some degree, it is working, although, of course, we should say Yep, that that Israel has continued its movements into Gaza, preparing to go into Rafah. I think what markets are looking at and what our clients are looking at is the activity in the north as well. Hezbollah has continued to send rockets. Those areas are still evacuated. You've seen Iran-backed attacks resume on U.S. troops. So it's a fluid situation, and I don't think that, unfortunately, Secretary of State Antony Blinken has a solution because he keeps pushing tired narratives and failed narratives and failed solutions. So it's a dangerous time.
I am talking with Mary Kissel. She's the executive vice president of Stevens Inc. And she does for Stevens what I try and do for you, which is to bring illumination to everything going on in the world. But she is focused primarily on investors. I'm focused on everyone who wants the news. Mary, there are two pieces this morning in John Ellis's news items I want to read to you. First piece: China signaled a new campaign to rekindle flagging growth, a fresh sign of rising angst at the very top of China's government. And the second story, that's from the Wall Street Journal: China's seeming reluctance to rebalance its economy is one of the great challenges facing the global financial system, threatening to worsen Beijing's trade and diplomatic relations not only with Western countries, but with developing nations. That's from the Financial Times. What is China doing with their economy?
Well, I think that narrative, Hugh, suggests that Beijing has the same goals as a Western capitalist system, and that's simply not the case. China is a party state. The entire economy and all of the wealth created is really at the mercy and for the party, for its sustainability, its preservation, but also the expansion of its power. And Xi Jinping was brought in to give order to chaos. Essentially, prior leaders had allowed corruption to simply run out of control, and he was brought in as a heavy hand to reassert the party's power over various parts of the society, over the military, over political rivals, over corporate leaders. And so it's no surprise that he, quote unquote, mishandled the COVID lockdown. His priority is not the well-being of the Chinese people; it's his own personal power and the power of the party. And I tell people this all the time: it's you can't think about communist China as if they have the same motivations. They simply don't.
Well, don't they need to at least keep their people fed? And if they have this giant real estate crash slowly unwinding, and I think it's enormous, isn't that going to put pressure on the party at every level?
Well, their only interest is keeping social order. And they've done that through creating a vast security state that's much bigger than even the People's Liberation Army. And in terms of, what's the level at which they can keep social order, what's the level of prosperity, remember, Hugh, that there are vast parts of China that are still desperately poor. You see these views of the skylines of places like Shanghai. That's not what all of China looks like. And also, if you want to see an economy that has managed to keep an authoritarian in control for actually a family dynasty, look at North Korea. How is it that they've maintained power? Through brutality. Doesn't mean that there isn't vast social discontent, but we can't measure that, Hugh, because there's no ability for outsiders and reporters such as yourself or academics or diplomats or even business people to go into the vast inner reaches of China and have honest conversations. People are rightly scared. So, could the place collapse? Could we wake up tomorrow and see uprisings all over the country? Well, we've seen it multiple times. Yeah, of course it's possible. But I think in the meantime, what I'm telling our clients, and that's investors, but it's also C-suites, it's also boards of directors who, by the way, don't really think about this stuff, don't have people like you or me on their boards most of the time. They're operationally focused. They're financially focused. They haven't had to think about this stuff. They're moving out. They're aware of the problems, You have, of course, some companies have so much sunk capital they really can't move out. That's Apple, that's Tesla, and others like it. But look at the FDI numbers. Look at what's happened on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. I mean, people are leaving. Westerners are leaving, and I think that
Well,
that's very
that's what I
telling.
want to ask you about, Mary. Up to 3 years ago, I sat on an endowment committee, and I was there to ask the dumb question. I'm the dumb question guy, and so I'd run through the allocation of the resources, and we had a very successful run over 20 years. But there was a 3 to 5% investment in China, and I would raise the question: do we want 3 to 5% of our money in Chinese funds? And the answer would always come back: we think that's a long-term good play. We're not going to pull that 3 to 5% out. And I would say, okay, fine. What are you advising people about that? Because no one is overly invested in it except for like Apple and manufacturers. But what about endowments that need to manage their money? Should they be in even a diversified China fund?
I mean, look, we shouldn't. If we're going to give investment advice, we're going to have to give a disclaimer. But so don't take this as investment advice. But I think it's reasonable to assume that if you're operating in a country and investing in a place that has no property rights, no rule of law, no independent boards of directors, that that's a pretty risky place to put your money. And I think there's an important discussion to be had, Hugh, not just about these funds and the management of these funds and the allocation. There's a discussion to be had about the indexes that are used, like MSCI and the inclusion of China and funds like that, of the inclusion of China exposure in pension funds. We should be talking to the trustees. We should be talking to the boards, the trustees of the funds, the boards of the companies that are allocating their pension money to these funds. But let's not put it all on the business community. There should also be clear signaling from the U.S. government of
Well, that
what
brings
they're
me
actually
to Secretary
doing.
Blinken. What was
That's
Secretary Blinken doing in Beijing this week?
Well, I think he believes, as his predecessors have, not in the Trump era, but prior to that, that talking is progress. And of course, that would be fine if you saw difference in the change in the behavior of the regime that's across the table from you. The problem is that the Biden team has sent now multiple levels of people, not just cabinet secretaries, but assistant secretaries and below, to have dialogues with their counterparts. And there's been no change in the behavior of Beijing on the fentanyl issue, on the ramming of boats in Philippine territory, on the threats that they make toward Taiwan. I mean, it's a very long list, Hugh, the attacks that they make on our cyber infrastructure and our satellites every day. So you have to look at their behavior and the rhetoric that they use to their own people. So I think he's not only is he spinning his wheels, it's actually a very negative development that we've restarted dialogue. It'll be seen as appeasement, and it'll be seen as a green light for China to do things like support Putin's Russia, like have investment agreements with Iran. I mean, this is a very destructive group that is forming, that is totally counter to U.S. interests and the interests of the free world. So I think in the investment community, you're going to see a flight to safety, meaning, the old standards, right? New York, London, Frankfurt, economies, and developing economies where we see a rule of law. Argentina was a great play last year. The investors are going back to basics, and I think it's long overdue.
But why is Elon Musk, this is a big question for 30 seconds, why is Elon Musk trying to change Xi Jinping's mind? He can't do it.
Well, we don't know if he's trying to change his mind, Hugh. We don't really know the motivations. He could be buying time. It could be that he believes that, car technology is somehow not a threat. I think that's nonsense. These data sharing agreements that you see, not just Tesla, but German car makers just announced with Baidu and other Chinese companies. Of course, that's going to be fed into their AI system. Nothing is useless to the CCP. So, will he eventually get kicked out of China? My bet would be yes, because that's happened to every other innovative US based company.